day the one that fits ya. The one that fits.
We'll just get started, and then, once whoever joins in. So you had 100 pages left of it.
Yeah.
Was it because it was a bit of a task to read it and finish it, or was it just you're just busy?
No, it's actually a very sort of easy book to read, but it was more being busy with other stuff and just not getting enough time to actually go through all of it. And it is 400 pages, so it's not something that you can sort of get through in a few days.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the reason why I didn't get to completely finish the book.
Yeah. No, I get that completely, because I mean, I think I could have read it a lot quicker, but because it wasn't that difficult of a book, but I think it was, I'm not going to lie to you, it was sometimes for me difficult it was easy actually for my mind to wander. And I don't know if it's because of the content of the book or the writing style or just my own attention deficit.
Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes my mind did wander. And it could also have something to do with the fact that there was a familiarity I had with some of the content of the book.
Yeah.
That I didn't feel like I needed to kind of pay as much attention as I would have if for example, when I was reading Things Fall Apart. Now that could be my own kind of bias towards or against, her as a writer. I don't know if it wasn't definitely, maybe it's an unconscious bias. Yeah. But definitely there were some times where I was like, oh, my mind wandered. And sometimes it's actually to do with what she was saying. I was like, oh, that reminds me of my family. And then you start thinking of your family or your village and stuff like that. So, but I actually really enjoyed it. I read her, the first book that she released. I know this was the first book that she wrote, The First Woman. Yeah. So it would be worth, kind of letting people know who are watching this that we're talking about The First Woman by Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi. So technically it was the first ever book she wrote. James just entered. It was the first book she wrote, but it was the second one she had published. But yeah, it was really, really, really good read, a very good read.
Yeah. We wait for names, Steve.
Hello.
Hey James, how you doing?
I'm doing okay.
Hi James, how are you?
Hi, I'm okay.
Yeah, so thank you for joining us. We're hoping to get someone else to join us, someone called Faith. Katasi can't make it.
Okay.
Yeah, she can't make it. I don't know if she would want me to say why she can't make it. So maybe, when I edit this, I'll just start from here so that, so she might not want me to say why she can't make it, but she's not able to make it. But yeah, what did you think of the book? Did you manage to finish it?
I haven't finished it. I'm on chapter 2.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And so me and Yusuf were talking about, I guess, maybe just how maybe gripping the book was. Like, did you find it hard to kind of read it, or was it just because you didn't have time?
Well, it's mostly because I haven't had that much time. I've been quite busy. But my initial impressions is that I understand what's going on, but I think it's going to take a bit of time to kind of really get into the book. And also, I feel like it could have done with some footnotes. I know that the book was was written for Ugandans in mind, specifically us Baganda people. But I felt like that it would need some of the stuff I'm reading. Only Uganda would know what she means. You see what I'm saying? Some of the way things are written, some of the names. When she starts talking about the story with the twin, when the little girl's telling the story about the twins, and she mentions the names Waswa and Nakato, and then she also mentions the fact that he was a Salongo. I thought that whole part of that would go over people's heads. They wouldn't understand what's actually being referenced, that aspect of our culture. So I thought that it could do with a bit more. So footnotes. So at least with a footnote, it doesn't have to kind of take over what's actually written in the book, but it's a guide for people who are not familiar with the culture, and people who are not aware about certain things. They could gain more understanding of what's actually going on. But I think it's okay. So I'm gonna give it a go. But yeah, I've been quite busy so far.
Okay. Before we move on, could you get your camera to be landscape so that it's a bit like, could you get it to landscape? Just turn it.
Okay.
Yeah. Just if you can, like it. Yes. Well, okay. So Yusuf, do you agree with the kind of need for footnotes?
Yes, I completely agree with James. I think for similar reasons. I mean, there's some stuff that I understood because obviously I grew up in Uganda and spent a long time there. So there's some things that I did understand. However, there's a lot that I had to sort of look up as well, because I just, yeah, and I just then, for example, if she said something in Luganda that I can speak Luganda, but reading it is something different. And some stuff that I would read completely wrong, and I feel like footnotes would have been quite useful. But yeah, same as you. I don't think that takes away from how well written it is and how interesting it is. And that's like same. I didn't finish the book as well. I'm still got about 100 pages left, and it's because it takes some time to actually get through the book and really appreciate the book, and that's why.
Okay, you think? From my initial impression, I think it could be quite a quick read. That's the impression that I got.
Yeah, it is actually. It's just I was telling Yusuf that for me it was easy for my mind to kind of wander, and I wonder if it was because of an unconscious bias, like that was rooted in either the fact that I was familiar with some of the stuff that she was talking about. So sometimes I was like, okay, cool, I get that. That reminded me of, this and that, or this village or family member. Or was it, again, and it's maybe the theme and the idea around the book is maybe because, I don't know, it could be an unconscious bias, me as a male reader. So perhaps because of the kind of the themes around feminism, I found myself maybe feeling as though it wasn't relating to me. So I would go, okay, well, she's written it specifically for a female audience. So then my brain would go, okay, well, in that case, I can just switch off on this little section and I'll just come back in. So that's me being honest and being kind of like honest about my opinions reading it. But it doesn't take away from how incredibly written it is, how in a lot of moments, actually, the majority of the book is very captivating, especially the whole saga where Chirabo moves to live with her dad, Tom, and she's going through, the family issues and so on and so forth. But with regards to the footnotes, I agree with you guys to an extent, only because Jennifer, in an interview, she talked about how, other authors that write, maybe European authors that write about their experiences. Now, they don't always have to explain what they're writing about. They just write it, and then we go and do the research and so on and so forth. Now, granted, there might be some.
Yeah. Okay, I give a really good example of a book that actually got good reviews and was actually quite commercially successful. It's called Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. Yeah, and the book is full of footnotes because she had built such a complex mythological world, and an alternative history. She had to put that in the book in a way that didn't obstruct the story, and it was very, very effective. So you'd read a chapter And then you get to the footnotes, and it will just discuss particular things that happened in that particular chapter, references to things, to parts of the world that she's created, the past and the history of that world. You know, so it was a really succinct and useful way to understand what's going on, but also to develop the scene, and to set the scene, and to describe everything that's happening in the book. Because I first completely disagree with what she was saying, the fact that we have to go away and do research, because that can really disrupt the reading experience, you know. And I feel like a book should provide all the information that you need, not to an extent of having to explain everything. I mean, some things can still be a mystery, but I think a book is supposed to be self-contained, you know. And recently I started reading a book by an Argentinian writer. Most of her books are written in Spanish, but some of them have been translated, and it has a really good translation. And the translation that I'm reading is really good, and it's because of the quality of the translation involved, you know. And there's so many books like that as well, like even historical books, things like the Arabian Nights. You know, we can only read it today because it's been translated, even though it's a compendium of kind of folklore from across the Middle East, India, and it's been written in Arabic and many different languages. The idea of us having to go away and do research to read her book, I feel like it's a bit lazy, to be honest with you. And I feel like just that example in that first part of the story where she's talking about the twins, you would completely miss all of the references if you didn't have an understanding of our culture. You know, that even on an emotional level, you wouldn't be able to connect and emphasize what was actually being talked about, you know, on all the different things that, yeah.
But I want to say that actually, I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. The fact that it's kind of been written with the specificity of Ugandan, or more specifically, Buganda culture. And I feel like that was her intention in the first place, to kind of create work for a Ugandan reader. And I think she kind of did that. She did that job brilliantly. Granted, there are certain, like Yusuf said, I do understand Luganda, I speak Luganda, and there were certain words that went over my head. But actually, I didn't mind that, because even when I speak to certain relatives in Uganda, they might say certain things I don't understand. Now, it doesn't take away what they're saying, and actually, it's an opportunity for me to learn a new phrase, learn a new, I guess, cultural piece of knowledge, whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was that jarring for me. And I think if you read more of it, you find that it actually gets it's part of her world building, you know, building the world of the novel. And she does repeat a few things sometimes. So hopefully, if you're a very savvy reader, you start going, oh, Dido, she said they've just entered the Dido. So maybe that's some sort of room in their house or something, you know, whatever that. So then it's actually kind of prompts the reader to engage with the language and engage with the culture, and maybe go on and speak to their Luganda speaking Ugandan friends and say, hey, I was reading this book and they were making reference to, you know, this word, and I didn't understand it. What's that to do with? And, you know, and it actually it encourages conversation. And I feel like literature and books are supposed to do that. You know, you see all these mythological books and people start discussing new phrases, Harry Potter, you know, all of that. And I feel like she's well within our right to do so. What do you think, Yusuf?
True. I think I haven't found it very jarring because I'm familiar with the culture. I'm just kind of looking from the perspective of somebody from outside of the culture reading the book. And the only reason
we should care. I don't think we should care about that. We shouldn't care about that.
Sure, hold on. But the only reason I mention that is that I realized since reading this translated book, which is a very good book, I'm not through it. Yeah, it's excellently written. It's a beautiful book. And what I realized, I need to read more books that don't belong to the English-speaking world. Do you see what I'm saying? But the only way for me to kind of be able to do that, if I can find a translation, you know. So I can see the point of, okay, we're not going to make it readable for we're just going to be specifically for us, you know. But I feel like that can be very myopic when you realize that even within Uganda, we are such diverse people, you know, so it's literally only our ethnic group can really appreciate this book, you know. And since I've been getting into kind of African authors, and there's been a real explosion really in books by African authors from different cultures, Nigerians, Igbos, Yoruba, you know, there's like science fiction, there's fantastical books as well. I feel like because of our diversity, I feel like there's a certain level of being able to accommodate others, you know, even within the African context, you know, so at least the book can circulate beyond just Buganda.
So James and Kalungi, I completely, and I think James, I agree with you more. But I think this debate about you know, footnotes and language and in which language a book should be written is something it's been going on, you know, for a long time. Like there's authors out, like African authors, who choose to specifically write in their own languages. I don't know, there's this Kenyan author called, I think his name's James Ngugi, I think. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but he chooses to write in Chikuyu, which is a, sorry?
Is it Ngushi wa Thiong'o?
Yes, he's the one.
Yeah.
Yes, he chooses to write in Chikuyu, which is, you know, Kenyan languages, and he's writing specifically for his people. And I think the argument is that one can write a book that is for their people, and there should be nothing wrong with that. And I think, yes, on one hand, it might not be relatable to the wider audience, but actually there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if you read old texts, you know, the Iliad and, you know, Odysseus and all the Greek sort of texts, essentially they were written for the Greek, and, you know, they're quite literary books, and they're very interesting to read. It's very interesting to get into, but also you have to do the research. Like you have to know the characters they're speaking about. You have to know the goddesses. You have to know the gods. And I feel like that does not take away from how good the book is. And with regards to translations of the book, it's very difficult for a book that is written in English with cultural context, because if it was written in Luganda, then a translation would probably be something that would be useful. However, it's written in English with you know, with Luganda every now and then. So I feel like she's attempting to get to that wider audience, but not taking away from writing for our own people as well, which is something that I do applaud.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, you know what? It's interesting actually. Obviously, this wasn't our plan. We were hoping to have
a female perspective.
Our women members of the Nile Book Club to you know, throw in their opinions, but they have been unable to make it. So I you know, the irony of three dudes, you know, discussing a book called The First Woman, written by a woman, isn't lost on us. But yeah, I think you guys.
Couldn't you kind of see, in terms of this perspective of a Ugandan man, from the perspective of Ugandan women? I mean, because even though it's designed for a female, but couldn't you see it from the perspective of Ugandan women as a Ugandan man? Isn't that thing that you can recognize?
Absolutely, yeah. No, I can kind of recognize and empathize with that. But I think the book comes across as something that's been written specifically to like inform and empower women, actually. Like that's what I from what I've read, you know, and I literally just finished it a few hours ago. And the way it ends with the message that, you know, women should stick together, and, you know, of course there's going to be conflict and everything, but at the end of the day, if they have each other, then they can help each other navigate this patriarchal, you know, world that we live in. So so of course it's okay for us to, you know, read it and dissect it, and there are characters in there that, you know, for example, there's a character called Sio Kabuye who considers himself a feminist, you know, and he's problematic in certain degrees. But it just, and you know, and even Chirabu's grandfather comes across kind of with little aspects of feminism. But I feel like, I feel like the book itself has been written with the female reader in mind.
Okay.
So it is interesting that we're discussing it. It would have been great to have, you know, the opinions of Katasi or Vene or other people, but you know, but you're right. I think our kind of view on it is also it is not just as important, but it's also important how we received it. Were there moments in the book that you guys kind of, I don't know, like me, like were there moments where you felt like, oh, this isn't my place to be privy to this piece of information? Because I did have a few of those moments.
I don't think I've got further enough to be able to discern that.
So I think I know the sort of moments you're talking about. I think there's moments, James, you don't mind some spoilers.
That's fine.
So I think there's some moments in the book where, this is a book about a woman discovering herself as a teenager and you know, growing up and learning how her body works. And I mean, there are moments which, you know, vividly explain, you know, that process. And I feel that I can see how it can be seen as, you know, this is something that I cannot relate to. However, I think having three of us here now discussing, you know, sort of a feminist book is actually an opportunity for us to see if we can, as James said, see it from a male Ugandan perspective. And I think there's a lot of themes. There's a lot of themes that, you know, go beyond feminism and the woman. You mentioned Seal Kawiye, who's meant to be mixed race, right? And so just from that, there's this whole white savior complex where you know, throughout the whole book, they're speaking about how the Ugandan man will have so many wives, how the Ugandan man does not respect women. How the Ugandan man is, you know, his word is the final word, and how women are not respected. And then comes along this mixed race, you know, half Ugandan, half. Well, he's if you read far enough, James, I think you realize he's actually not not white. But you get to a point where it's like, well, actually, he's the only one who comes across as a feminist, besides what's her name again? Chidabo's grandfather. He's the only other man that comes across as feminist, and ironically, he's the only man that can sort of understand Chidabo and her discoveries. And I feel like the fact that it had to be him. I mean, I haven't finished the book, so I'm not sure if there's anyone else that comes along. But the fact that it had to be him and not a Ugandan man is something that it's the one fault that I could perhaps pick out up to this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what did you think? What do you think in reference to kind of when it talks about things like polygamy?
What do I think?
Yeah.
I've got two thoughts in this. I mean, from a cultural perspective, and I can understand the time in which the book was written, the time in which the book was written, and I can understand that, you know, it was seen as acceptable, and that the second wife, you know, would accept the fact that once the husband moved on to another wife, all she had was her children. My personal opinion on that is perhaps that, you know, the woman's place in this decision did not count, and which I feel like maybe, you know, nowadays you have consensual polygamy, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I feel like perhaps the Ugandan woman in this day and age would be open to consensual polygamy, and that's something that can be respected, and you know, it's not something that should be shameful. It's not something that should be looked down upon. And there's characters within the book that actually do recognize that, and there's characters that are very open-minded to how the modern woman should be. That's it.
Okay. For me, I think because I only kind of came to understand the aspects about polygamy quite recently. I think that's probably because I've spent so much time growing up in the UK, And then I feel like my parents and my mother was raised Christian, and then like my mother's a very particular type of woman. So I just kind of just assumed that my situation was like the situation of most people in Uganda. And so when I discovered it, and when I discovered the tradition of polygamy in Africa as a whole, my initial reaction was I was quite shocked, and I was quite hostile to the idea. And then over time with learning, I started to kind of really understand the roots of the tradition, you know, and of the behavior. Because often when you see certain behaviors or certain things and certain traditions, it's rooted in something, you know. So what I learned was just about the fact that obviously we had agricultural societies, agricultural cultures, you know, where the number of hands that work the land is literally important in terms of your production, how much you produce, how much you earn. So there's definitely an incentive to have many hands working the land, including so in terms of husband and wives, and then also the number of children that you have. And then also considering just also how even today in Africa, child mortality is a big thing. You know, most people can't just afford to just have one child because the percentage chance of that child dying before the age of 5. You know, so when I started to look at the real cultural roots of it, it helped me to understand it. You know, and it helped me to understand why, in the African context, we can't really compare it to the European context. You know, that it's far more. I just thought it was just a sex and relationships thing, for example. You know, and then when I started learning about different African cultures, like even African cultures today in places like West Africa, even in a polygamous situation, when the wife is pregnant, the man they cannot engage in sexual activity for at least like a year, even after she has her pregnancy. So I started to realize it's much more than just a sexual relationships thing. Because I think initially I just thought it's just men who want to go and they want to have many women, you know. And then when I really understood it from that perspective, it changed my perspective on it. But I do think in the modern context, people need to take into account that we don't live that agricultural subsistence lifestyle. People who don't live that agricultural subsistence lifestyle, you know, women today are earning. Women today are able to bring in money, and I find that polygamy rates tend to go down in relation to how educated women are or how capable women are of producing and looking after themselves. So I guess that was my kind of perspective on it. But yeah, initially I was just like, well, I thought, how do these situations work? And then also like even with my cousins and their mum, never realizing that okay, she was literally in a polygamous union with 3 other women, you know, and yeah, it kind of blew my mind. But yeah.
Those are some really good points there, actually, James. So in regards to like your expectations before starting to read the book, and either during or after, did the book meet your expectations, or did it exceed? And for James, you know, do you feel like it's going to meet your expectations? We'll start with you, Yusuf.
Did the book meet my expectations in terms of?
Yeah, and what were your expectations first? You know, it's okay to judge the book by its cover and the title and everything.
So I did judge the book by its title. I did think the book would be about, you know, feminism, which the biggest thing was feminism. But I feel like it actually met my expectations quite a lot. This is the first Ugandan writer that I've heard of. I'm embarrassed to say that, but yeah, it's the first Ugandan writer that I've heard of, and so I was quite excited to actually start reading the book and see, you know, how she comes across and how well she writes, and I had very high expectations because it's actually been, you know, it's internationally acclaimed book, so I thought, you know, this is going to be really interesting. It's definitely met my expectations. She's a very good writer, and it's just the number of themes explored in just, you know, in the 300 pages that I've read is just limitless. You know, she talks about, you know, she talks about feminism, there's politics, so the fact that this whole, you know, this whole self-discovery is set, it's set in the background of Idi Amin's reign, and how that affected her education and her friendships and her relationships. And so she explores that as well. And I personally have had stories about, you know, growing up in Idi Amin's, you know, regime, but I've never sort of read a story or had, you know, parents usually avoid the questions, well, my parents specifically, but I've never had someone sort of describe their life in so much detail within that era. And so for me, that was something new to sort of find out from the book. And I was actually, you know, the one thing that my dad's told me about that was the fact that in Idi Amin's reign, you know, Uganda was very, it was, you know, it was clean. You know, you had buses that, you know, were quite frequent, and, you know, systems were quite organized, and there were things that worked. And it wasn't all about the things that we hear about the regime, and there was actually things that worked as a society. And so the fact that she doesn't shy away from that, she actually does paint a picture of a very civilized Uganda and a very civilized Kampala. I really appreciate that. So it's met my expectations in more than one way.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think for me, when I started, I was actually quite surprised. I was surprised about the kind of some of the magical realism and kind of supernatural aspects of it. So in the first chapter, when I saw that the first chapter was called The Witch, the first part of the book, and the fact that she has like a second self, an evil version of herself that tends to astral project, I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting a book that was very much grounded in the real world and the mundane world. And I'm just kind of interested in how that's going to develop as the book goes along. You know, is it more kind of a question of, does she kind of have a mental illness, or is it kind of, do you see what I'm saying? Like, there's so many ways you can look at it. So I'm really intrigued from that perspective.
Yeah, I love her kind of the form, her use of form. And I think, James, you're in for a surprise and a shock, because whilst she does kind of like make use of the supernatural, I feel like she doesn't actually follow it on like that. As soon as she leaves the village, she leaves that first woman there. In fact, she's instructed by Nsuta, the witch, to get rid of her, you know, and just bury her and leave her there so that she can move forward. Because this, you know, for anyone who's watching this that maybe hasn't got to that stage yet, this initial version of herself, you know, flies out and does things that she wouldn't do. And I guess I took it as a metaphor of, you know, the initial aspect of the female gender, the initial aspect of women. Maybe female isn't the best term to use, but and Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi talks about how every woman has that first woman, you know, that initial kind of like free, confident, loud, big, you know, assertive, but then society drills it out of them, you know, the patriarchy drills it out of them. Other women drill it out of them, you know, and in the same way that she didn't shy away from, you know, talking about the, I guess, seemingly positive aspects of Amin's regime, she also didn't shy away from talking about some of the, I guess, how complicit, or how, she didn't shy away from commenting on how complicit some women are in perpetuating the patriarchy. And that was really, really interesting because, you know, she takes Chirabo and puts her in an all-girls school. And you think, okay, that should be okay. It's nothing but women there. But actually, you know, she experiences this kind of, you know, misogyny and sexism at the hands of, you know, her fellow students who are women or young girls. So I think she's a masterful writer, like Makumbi. She's a masterful writer, and I think she's so clever with the kind of links to Ugandan culture. It's in particular Buganda culture, because one of the characters is called Nambi, and Nambi was
Chintu's wife.
Yeah, Chintu's wife, and Chintu's the first book that she had published. You know, so she has that linked, and then she talks about death as well, who is also related to Nambi, Walumbe. She talks about that, you know, and she just like Yusuf said, she brings in so many different themes and ideas, but the world remains constant. You know, the world that she's built, this family, this really, really interesting, rich family that she's created. So yeah, so the more I think about it, the more actually I realize how like rich and fulfilling the book was to read, because like I left there knowing so much, a little bit more about my culture as a Muganda man, you know. But also in regards to, I'll say this before I move into the next topic, there were certain moments where I was like, okay, this is something for women, this is for the woman's reader, you know, this is something to elevate her, but also actually it is a piece of information and knowledge that we as men need to know. Certain issues that women go through that I didn't realize that they go through, and I found it actually very informative and actually enriching to be introduced to this, like, you know, aspects around how the idea that women have always been kind of pushed into this kind of behavior, this particular type of personality by society and you know, and their own gender, and sometimes you just take that for granted and you don't realize the pressures that they are under and the pressures that we put them under as well. So it was very, very interesting to actually be familiar or be introduced to that.
It made me also think, because I have a book called Masculinities in African Literary and Cultural Texts, and there's a chapter on Baganda. So essentially, it's like it analyzes a collection of different Baganda proverbs that discusses gender from the masculine perspective. And from that, it was interesting because it was more complex than I thought it was. It wasn't just a very kind of obvious one-sided story of men being in control and men having favor. Even though there's proverbs where they talk about boys and men having favor, because even in that first chapter, when she's telling the story about the twins, it's kind of like a story about the way that boys have favor. Because the father, he has so many daughters, but he wants a son. But in looking at the different proverbs, it was kind of, there's more of a duality in that. If you actually look at Baganda proverbs, on the one hand, yes, in some situations, boys do have favor, but then there's also kind of stereotypical depictions where men are seen as incompetent. You know, you've got men who don't look after their children, or men who don't pull their weight, you know, and they need women. So that's a really interesting thing to kind of consider in terms of, and that's kind of our base culture, going back into old school Baganda proverbs. So I was thinking in terms of, when I started reading the book, how that's going to evolve, and if there's going to be more of a if there's going to be more nuance in that perspective, because I think for me as a Ugandan, I could really relate to that aspect of things in terms of the proverbs, because I feel like my mother is the one, especially in the relationship with my dad, for example, she's the one that makes things happen. Like, she's a really critical and crucial role within the family dynamic. You know, she's never just been the little woman, even though of course there's still patriarchal things, there's still things that she does, she's the nurturer, you know, but I've always felt that she's always held a very, very important role within the family dynamics. And and I also think in terms of Jennifer's book, will she consider the impact of colonialism as well? Because I sometimes feel like some of that patriarchal stuff it's also partly been kind of been spread by osmosis through colonialism, you know, through even things like Christianity, even Islam as well, to be honest with you. And I just wonder if there's a separation in terms of the impact of religion on us as people and colonialism, as well as the patriarchy within our own culture, and where that begins and where that ends, you know, and what is the real source of where that patriarchy comes from, and has that been considered and been really understood by people?
Yeah. So I think that yes, she slightly touches on colonialism and its impact on that, but I feel like she doesn't do it enough.
Okay.
And I feel like the reason being that there's actually a strong cultural influence prior to colonialism, and that means that I think the impact of colonialism was actually not as significant as you perhaps think, James.
Okay.
On the patriarchy in Uganda culture, I think that was pre-colonial. The other thing I think is that especially at the beginning of the book, as you mentioned, you were quite surprised at how and how she's flying out of her body. Did she have a mental health condition? I mean, I was exactly the same. I was quite surprised by the beginning. At one point, I thought she was transgender. At one point, I thought, I thought she had a mental illness. And I thought she was schizophrenic. So there's, but then I realized she's actually just a kid. And as kids, and this is the one thing I actually want to make clear. So I know it's written from a female perspective, but I feel like most of the things that she mentions are things that, from a male perspective, like anyone would experience growing up as well. Like the stories as a kid, you imagine different things. You imagine what life is outside your house, what life is outside your village, what life is outside your country, and you make up stories. And I think the fact that she starts off with Chirabo telling a very imaginative story is another example of what kids do when they imagine things. And they make a big deal out of everything, especially as a teenager. You're starting to discover the changes in your body and trying to understand them. And I feel like that's the point where the Buganda culture has an influence on that. The fact that they use that, and she explains this quite well in the book. They use that to try and deter the women from getting pregnant. So they use all these stories and all these rituals and all this. I think there's just scare stories just to try and get the girls to sort of behave, because they, I don't think there was anything like family planning back then. And that theme is introduced a bit later on. But I feel like, yes.
I don't know. I think family planning has always been an issue.
Yeah.
Because of the taboos.
Yes.
Have you heard of the taboos that if a girl gets pregnant and she's not married, they can like leave you. Some of the tribes they will literally leave you on an island to die.
Yeah.
There's those type of stories,
So that's definitely explored in the book. But then moving into the book, she gets away from that, as Kalungi said, when she moves to the city. She leaves all this, she leaves all this Buganda stuff behind. I feel like she just leaves it behind, and just that, her aunt who lives in the city she's very modern. She's speaking to her about sex very openly. She's telling her you could use contraception, all these themes, if you have a boyfriend, and all the things that she's being told you could not do back home. All of a sudden she's realizing that they're not as taboo as they're made out to be when she was growing up. So there is definitely a transition, and the transition happens as she's growing up, and I feel like that's something that we can all relate to. You don't have to be a woman to relate to that.
Yeah, true.
So, Yusuf, you talked about how the fact that Kabuye was, I guess he's referred to as the Mzungu character, but he, along with Miro, Chirabo's grandfather, are the only two characters who are seemingly kind of pro-feminism, male feminists. And you felt as if that was maybe a slight fault. Were there certain things, and for you, James, maybe in the early stages of the book, were there certain points in the book where you're like, that's something I don't quite agree with, or maybe it was a bit of a challenge for you to get your head around?
Okay, so for me, from the perspective of the grandfather, I have always thought, especially from families who were more well-to-do and educated, the fathers and grandfathers would always be feminists. That was my personal expectation, from the perspective of making sure that your girls are educated, you know, that your girls have prospects. Because as we know, I mean, that's another thing that I've only kind of really began to understand the inequities between the genders, between men and women globally, you know? So like everything, all of the different things in terms of developmental things in societies and poverty, they all impact women more than they impact men. And so I've always kind of had this understanding that if you're a Ugandan man and you have money and you come from wealth and you have an education, you need to make sure that your girls are educated, because it literally means, like it said in the first chapter, it means that you have more prospects than just having to become a wife, you know, and to be married and to be married or sent into a child marriage.
I think that was probably depending on, maybe like you said, maybe earlier on, like how well to do the family is, because she does take us back to the 30s, where, you know, two of the girls, which one of them being grandmother Alikisa, who's Chirabu's grandmother, and Nsuta, and how they make this pact to marry the same man. And even though actually they're both kind of both their dads are well-to-do, one being a leader and the other being, I think, a priest, they make this decision to say, well, I will go to school, or you will go to school, while I kind of pursue this guy and keep him warm for you. And then similarly as well with Chirabo and our friend Jiwa, they have a kind of parallel relationship where Chirabo's from a well-to-do family, she gets to go to school. But because Jiwa's father was like, I think a help or a herdsman or whatever, she doesn't really get to have the same privileges of having an education. And in fact, she has no ambitions to do so. Like Kawiye even offers, this is towards the end, Yusuf, I don't know if you came across it yet. But
No.
yeah, so Kawiye will impregnate her.
I mean, I've come to that part, yeah.
Yes, so you know about the impregnation. So he impregnates, and he actually, later on, it's revealed that he offers to pay for school fees, so that, like you said, James, she has more opportunities than just being, you know, a mother or wife. But she decides not to, and that's partly to do with the fact that she's coming from a family that was never going to be perceived to be as well-to-do. She was always, she feels as though she was always destined to be a maid. She was going to be, you know, Shirabo's maid. She's going to be, you know, she's not going to be more than anything that her family has kind of has bred her to be, to a certain extent. Yeah, so I think there is some truth to, like, you know, the fathers, especially maybe in colonial times, where they wanted people to be educated and stuff like that, because there was value in that. But sometimes, at least in this book, they were certain families who just didn't have those kind of opportunities, and their kind of descendants took that on board and were like, you know what, I'm just born to be a herdsman, a maid, whatever, so on and so forth, and I'm not going to try to do more. Yusuf, did you have those moments where you're like, whoa, this is a big challenge for me, I don't know if I can get on board with this?
Yes, I mean, before I get to that, there's one thing that I think I disagree with the both of you with regards to education and being pro or anti-feminist. The biggest example being Tom, her dad. Tom's from obviously a very, you know, well-off family. He's very well educated. He has a nice property in Kampala. However, he's definitely not feminist. When he brings Kirabo home, James might not have got to this point, but when he brings her home and he's telling her, I need to undo all those things that granddad has done in terms of, you know, making you a woman and all these things. Yes, he does believe in education, but that's because, you know, he believes in education because they've always been educated, and he comes from a family that believes in education, but that does not make him a feminist. And so I feel like education and family background have little to do with it, and it was more the person themselves. His sister is completely different, Tom's sister is completely different. They're both equally educated, almost the same generation, but her ideas are completely different from his ideals. So I think that's one thing. But in terms of moments, yes, the Gibwe moment was the one where, when Theo impregnates her. So for me, that was the moment I was like, this is like, I guess, history repeating itself. If you've gotten that far into the book, that's definitely history repeating itself. Two friends, and he's now gone and done this awful thing to Shirabo, and that's the moment I was like, wow, okay. It took me a while to recover from that. It was so unexpected. It was definitely so unexpected. How about you?
Okay, guys, it's been about maybe, well, technically it's probably been less than an hour. We've been talking for less than an hour. I want to end it with this. Would you recommend this book from what you've read so far? Yusuf, you're a bit further on, so I'll start with you. Would you recommend people to read into this, not just Buganda, but maybe Uganda or lovers of African literature?
100%. I think this is an international book. I definitely think if it hasn't already, it's probably going to win a few prizes. I'm not in the arts or literature world, so I wouldn't know what those prizes are, but I definitely think it's prize worthy, because I think she's written it so well and it's so relatable. Probably more relatable to Baganda, but I think it's relatable from a female perspective. So I think, yes, I would definitely recommend this book.
And James?
I would definitely recommend this book because it's written by a Ugandan author and it's written by an African author. And it's nice to see more African literature out there, written by Africans from an African perspective. So I would definitely recommend this book.
Absolutely. And I agree as well. I would definitely recommend this. And Yusuf, it should be winning awards. There was the Booker Prize recently. Unfortunately, she never made it on the short list or the long list. I don't know, maybe her publisher didn't submit it. And I haven't really seen her on many kind of literature prizes, but I'm hoping that maybe it's to do with when it was published. So hopefully we'll see her in 2021, her winning so many awards, because it is an incredible book. And I think it goes beyond just the Buganda as well, because when Chirabo goes off to secondary school at St. Teresa's, she does meet people from different parts of the world. Different parts of the country. For example, Atim is her best friend, one of her best friends, and they live in these houses named after strong African women like Ya Asentwa and Queen Nzinga, and she does it really in a very, very clever way, like in how she describes the people from those houses. Queen Nzinga, I think, she makes reference, she calls them backbreakers, and that's linked to Queen Nzinga having sat on one of her kind of helpers' backs when she was negotiating with Portuguese people. At least that's how I saw it. And I think, she does try to kind of, also she doesn't exonerate the Buganda and make them kind of like or she doesn't deify them and make them angelic. She does, pinpoint certain kind of negative aspects of the Buganda, and she tries to include the whole of Uganda into this novel. And for that reason, I definitely would recommend this book. I think it's an incredible, powerful book, and it should be on everyone's reading list, not just if you're a lover of African literature, but literature in general. So before we go, guys, I know, Yusuf, you're a doctor. James, I understand you're in tech or technology. Are there certain things you're working on at the moment that you would want our Nile Book Club viewers to know about? We'll start with you, James.
Okay, I'm working on a personal project. It's called Bantu Names. So it's a website application that is specifically targeted towards African names. And me as a Ugandan, as a Maganda, I'm starting off with Ugandan names. So I've been working on it for a while, but I haven't had a lot of time because it's just been in my spare time that I've been able to work on it. So I haven't progressed that far with it. But yeah, so the idea that it will be a naming portal, so people can go on there, search for names, browse names by a particular ethnic group, for example, or clan, and then they can discover new names and learn more about African names.
And do you have a website for that yet?
Yes, I do have websites. I haven't released that in the public though at the moment because it's
Okay.
still kind of going through different betas. So I'm just kind of getting feedback from friends and family, and I want more functionality to be on there as well. It doesn't have as much functionality as I would like before I make it widely available. But
Okay.
it is up and available on the internet if you have the link. But yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I really look forward to seeing that. Actually, sounds like an incredible idea. Yusuf, have you got anything
James,
you'd like? Yeah.
Yeah, James, that sounds like such a good idea. I look forward to it. So most of the stuff I work on is mostly like scientific papers, but recently I did start writing sort of articles. I have one article coming out which addresses sort of healthcare inequalities, and it's sort of based on the impact of coronavirus on Black and ethnic minorities, and how that's been sort of how that's brought all the healthcare inequalities over the last 20 years onto the surface and sort of highlighted them. So that's coming out, I think, next month to the Royal Society of Medicine Journal. So yeah.
Oh wow, incredible.
Okay.
Amazing. All right, we'll look out for that. And for me, just follow me, just find my website, kalungi.co.uk, Kalungi, and it's got everything that I'm doing there, from my music, my clothing line, Kalungem, to my acting and writing. So yeah, thank you so much everyone for watching. Thank you, Yusuf. Thank you, James. And I think because it's the three of us, I was wondering, do you guys think we should come up with the book to read for next time, or should we wait to send out an email? What's your thoughts?
I think send out an email.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And I'll need to do a little brainstorm as well. What the next book should be? It has to be Ugandan related. That's it.
It doesn't have to be Ugandan. It can be, as long as it's written by an African writer.
Okay.
Then yeah. But okay, cool. Well, I'll send out an email, and I'll get that confirmed. And love, obviously, to Kitasi Ichironde, one of our co-founders and co-hosts. And yeah, we'll see you next month.
Okay.
See you next month. Good chatting to you guys. Take care.
Bye bye.
All on day, the one that fits ya. 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 The moment they are gone, say I know she can mash it up. She put it in reverse just to show she can back it up. The cake that she make is hers, so she stuck it up. Natural woman, she not feel